Hi guys, well thank you very much once again for your attention. So previously we were talking about the value of context in terms of showing the same ads on different websites and getting very different results, and the impact of the audience of those sites on the attention and the emotion that goes with the to the ads. But of course the crucial thing as well is to work out how this relates to immediate results. Does attention really matter when it comes to sales? And we're very grateful to have Patrick here from British Gas, and we're going to talk about exactly that, about how it's the attention to advertising that leads to recall, and it's the recall of advertising that leads to sales. Things that seem very, very simple, but are often sort of ignored when it comes to programmatic advertising buying. The data that we're going to use in this section of the presentation isn't experimental data. It isn't getting people to do studies like we were working when we were with Unruly. This comes from the Lumen panel. Now, I was up on stage here last year telling you about this, but this was launched 2.5 years ago now. It's a panel initially of 500 households with laptops all equipped with little mini eye tracking cameras that passively monitor what people notice and what people ignore whenever they're online. We pay people £10 a month and they can leave at any time, and it's all GDPR compliant and so on. And like I say, what it does is it records what people could see, the sites that they go to and the ads that they're served, but also what they did see. Because as I'll say in a second, people are very, very good at ignoring advertising. And understanding what it is that people do actually look at is tremendously important. So I'm just talk about some of the general findings from the panel, that reprise of some of the things we said last year, but sort of build on that. And then I'll hand over to Patrick, who'll talk about the specific use that we've been putting this data to help optimise British Gas's media buying and the impact that's had on Newsbrands. So the first thing to say is that there is a big difference between an ad being viewable and an ad being viewed. Just because you can see something doesn't mean that you will see something. Here is a page from MSN, very high quality website, and an entirely normal one. And here we can see right at the top there's an ad for Admiral out there. That was 90% viewable in this test, which is obviously far higher than normal, but it's a particularly good viewability there. But only 18% of people actually noticed that ad. When the second ad is 82% viewable, again, very high viewability, but only 12% of people noticed that ad. And over the last 2.5 years, we've collected hundreds of thousands of data points. And what we can now say is that, in general, as I said before, people are very good at ignoring advertising. Just because something's viewable doesn't mean it's going to be viewed. In actual fact, what we find is that only 22% of viewable digital advertising actually gets looked at. So when your viewability company comes along and says you have 80% viewability or 90% viewability, you go, yes, absolutely fantastic. I've achieved this fantastic aim. You have to remember that just because something is viewable doesn't mean that it actually gets viewed. In actual fact, only 22% of ads will be seen. Now, what's interesting about that is, of course, this is an average. An average is hide as much as they reveal. Some sites, some formats, some advertisers do much, much better than this average, and some do much, much worse. And that's what we'll talk about here. So what is it that makes some things better and some things worse than the average? Well, there are lots and lots of factors we can go, but there are three really, really big ones that we have been taking into account, and we think that you guys should be taking more into account. The first is not just about sheer viewability, but viewable time, the amount of time that an ad is available to be seen, and taking that far more seriously. The second is about format choice. Again, lots of people are optimizing their buying to the sheer viewability of different formats. But just because something can be seen doesn't mean that it will be seen. And so there's important format choices there. And the final thing is about site choice. And that obviously has some particular bearing on Newsbrands. So the first thing to say is that the longer an ad is in view, the more likely it will be to be noticed. So here is your viewable time, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds. And then up there is the percentage chance of it being seen. It isn't a straight line that goes across, it's a curve. You know, if your ad has been in view for 40 seconds, it's not that much more likely to get noticed. But there is an enormous difference between an ad being seen, or available to be seen for 2 seconds to 5 to 10. What's happening in industry at the moment, and I'm sure that none of you are doing this, and you're all aware of this, but what's happening at the moment is that industry is optimizing to very, very low rates of viewability. Here, you know, and actually this is slightly generous here. This is a 2 second thing. But if you're optimizing to the 50% of the pixels to 1 second time, then the chances of people actually looking at your ads are minuscule. The current minimum viewability standards are just that. They are the absolute bare minimum. And whether it's a 1 second rule or a 2 second rule or a 3 second rule, either it's all too short. The most important thing is to look at the viewable time and look for publishers that can deliver large amounts of viewable time. And as I'm sure you can imagine, Newsbrands are particularly good at doing that. The reason why lots of digital marketing isn't very effective at the moment is that it's seen for a fraction of a second. And that is not long enough to deliver the brand message that you're paying to deliver. The second thing to say is that not all formats get noticed at the same rate. So here we have the same thing, viewable time, because time is the most important metric that we have, and again the chance of being seen. And here you can see the different curves for different formats here. And what's important about this is that many people are optimizing their investment to share viewability, and in that smaller formats like MPUs and leaderboards do very well because they load very, very quickly, and so the actual viewability is very good. The problem with these formats is that they're much less likely to get noticed than the larger formats. And at the end of the day, what are you paying for? Are you paying for the chance to be seen, or are you paying to be seen? And we think that lots of advertisers are making a mistake by buying smaller formats when in actual fact it's worth paying for the space. Because unless you pay for larger, more immersive formats, takeovers, things like that, people won't actually notice the ads. There's no point in paying for something that people will never look at. And then the third thing that makes a big difference is site choice. The same ads appearing towards the same sort of people will do very, very differently on different sites. And that was the point that we were trying to make before the break when I was on stage with Becky from Unruly, that exactly the same ads perform very, very differently on different sites. And that data is absolutely backed up with the data from the panel that we have to share here. The best performing site, actually the formatting's gone a little bit different here. The best performing site in the country last year was the Times newspaper, where an ad on the Times has a 54% chance of being noticed. It's much better than Facebook, which is as you can see, a very good site as well. There are other good brands out there as well. The Times, the Telegraph, the Sun's very good, the Guardian. And in actual fact, anything with Newsbrands in front of it does pretty well, to be honest. But the absolute best performing site was the Times. And that's interesting because what you have there is you have a very simple, elegant site with highly committed readers who engage with the content. They follow exactly all the sort of stuff that we were talking about before the break is something that is inherent in the Times experience, and is exactly the same for many other news brands, like the Guardian, like the Telegraph, like even news brands that aren't members of Newsworks do very well. And at the other end, you have brands like eBay. Now, eBay is a very good site. There's not Russian bots or fraud there. You know, there's very good thing. But an average ad on eBay has a 4% chance of being noticed. So even these are viewable ads. But why would eBay do so badly in comparison to that? Why is the Times 11 times better than eBay? Well, because eBay, when you're on eBay, you're there to buy a kettle, or you're there to buy a toaster. You have a mission there, and you don't necessarily spend the same amounts of time with the advertising. And when you start having a look at this sort of stuff from just a Newsbrand's point of view, again, you see some important differences. So for all other sites, you have about an 18% chance of noticing the ads. For Newsbrands, you have a 29% chance of noticing the ads. For all other sites, on average, advertising that gets looked at for a second and a bit. We go back to what I was saying beforehand about time being really important, and perhaps people don't have time to watch a whole video. In actual fact, on average, people are looking at it for about 1.2 seconds. The same, but Newsbrands do much better there. And ads on Newsbrands do particularly well because, not just because they get more time, but they generate more time more quickly. So the important thing is that at 10 seconds viewability, your average ad has a 15% chance of being noticed, but on Newsbrands, it's a 25% chance of being noticed. And similarly, the actual dwell time with the advertising, if you get a significant amount of time, which of course is quite a regular thing to happen on a Newsbrand, then people are much more likely to spend a significant amount of time with the advertising. Given the fact that it's attention and time that matters, Newsbrands are the things that develop that. But the really important thing for us is this something that has commercial impact? Does attention lead to sales? And so we've been working with the guys from British Gas to look into exactly this issue. And I'll pass you over to Patrick now, who can tell you through that part of the story.
Thanks, Mike. So, yeah, as Mike said, what we wanted to do from our side, from a client-side perspective, was actually look at, well, how can we use this to improve the efficiency of our activity? And as Mike mentioned, we were working with our media agency to look at the link between the impression data and sales. And we couldn't see as much of a link between the impression data and the actual sales. We'd done some attribution work on it, and we could see that our display advertising was working. But we couldn't always identify exactly which part we knew was doing it. So what we started working with Mike about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago now, we started on our creative optimization. And then we thought about, well, how can we move on to the media buying side of things? So we worked on what is the link between attention and sales, and then looking at, well, actually, if we can find that link, how can we then target and buy directly for the placements that we think are going to get more attention? Because always what we're trying to do is essentially get more eyes on our advertising for as much time as possible to have as much likelihood that we can drive or influence someone to come to our website and then potentially make a purchase. So what we did was, instead of actually just putting this into practice, we decided to actually look at the data we already had and work with Lumen to see if we could actually see that in our existing data. So we worked and took some of our double verified campaign viewability data. We took some of our ad serving data from DoubleClick, and then we passed that over to Mike and the team at Lumen. And what they did was then they modeled that data based upon what Mike's already spoken about, which was their panel set of data to actually see if we could see the links that they'd seen. And we did, which was good. So we found that actually the ads that are more likely to be seen based on Lumen's data were the ads that actually had more likelihood of driving conversions on the back of it within the data, within our DoubleClick data. So you can see, if you look at the actual likelihood of something to be viewed, the index for it to convert is significantly higher than if you were looking at the really lower end, which is for us exactly what we want to be seeing, because we want to see that buying attention, and it seems really simple because it's essentially you get people to look at your ads and they actually then have more likelihood to go on and buy something. That's exactly the point of what we're trying to do with our advertising. There's no point putting our advertising out there and nobody looks at it because then they have no chance of then going on to make a decision or to change what their decision process is going to be. And as Mike's also spoken about, the really important point as well is looking at that dwell time. So when you see the dwell time increase significantly to 2.5 to 3 seconds, that's when we saw a really big increase up to, on the index, over 200 with the likelihood that somebody that would go on to their convert as an impression. So for us, when we're trying to get the maximum amount of all our spend on display advertising, is really, really interesting data. And what's the importance for Newsbrand sites? So we worked recently with Mike as well and looking at some of our data from Q4 and Q1 this year. And they ran through the data again. And what we found was that actually the average uplift in attention from Newsbrand sites was actually 30%, as opposed to all the other sites that were running within that period. So again, based upon the data that Mike and the guys had already seen from their own panel, what we saw within our data, with the actual data that the impressions that we'd set live, was exactly the same thing, that the Newsbrand sites were actually delivering more attention than other websites. And then again, as we'd expected to see, which again is positive, there was an uplift on the actual click rate and the conversion rate on the back of that, which is for us the ultimate metric, because even if we're driving more attention, it doesn't really make a difference if it doesn't then have an outcome on the back of it. Whereas in this case, we saw that there's a 261% average uplift on click rate, and there was a 51% uplift on the conversion rate on those Newsbrand sites, which is, again, that direct link between what we're seeing with attention and then action on the back of that attention. And again, if you look at just the correlation between the attention and the sales, you can see that the Newsbrands really did have much more correlation between a high likelihood of effective attention, as we've been talking, as Mike and I have been talking about recently, which is the more likelihood that we're going to be driving some sales from that activity. Again, exactly what we want to be seeing for our display activity. So what we then decided to do was, this is great, this is the data, this is what it's telling us, but what can we actually do about it? Because we can see the pattern, but at the moment, as we've been talking about, the way that we're set up is based on a viewability. We want to buy 1 second of 50% of the ad. So how do we actually buy attention? So we've been working with the guys at Lumen and our team at Mediacom as well to buy attention. So we started the test about 2 months ago, where the guys at Lumen produced a whitelist of all the sites, including some Newsbrand sites, that we saw were performing well. And we segregated a part of the country. So we looked at the north, and we're just saying, in this area, buy only the whitelist that Lumen have provided us. And what we did then is we've looked at the results, the initial results, which showed, again, positively, that we were seeing, again, that correlation between the attention and the sales outcome on the back of it. And we passed some of that data back to Lumen, who have then revised the whitelist, again, based on that data. And we're now running a wider whitelist of what we can see is good quality placements and websites, again, to try and improve the performance of our advertising. And at the moment, we're seeing that there's some really positive results on the back of that.
So to conclude then, and this is a conclusion from both of the bits that we've been involved in, we started talking about the importance of context and audience and how attention is the product of both of those things, and the results would be better sales. What the work that we've been doing with British Gas and now with other brands as well shows that buying ads in a better context is worth it. Buying better audiences is worth it. Because better context and better audience leads to better results. And what's exciting for us is that we now have the ability to put a number against what counts as a better context. We have a number to put against what counts as a better audience. And as the data from British Gas shows, we have a number to put against what counts as a better result, which is better sales and better profits. So that's tremendously exciting. Thank you very much.